I rarely preach two-part sermons. However, this sermon on surrender is closely aligned with the sermon that I delivered a couple of weeks ago on fear, because our reluctance to surrender is closely related to fear of losing control. When most people hear the word surrender, they think of something negative: giving up, losing, being humiliated, allowing oneself to be controlled, or perhaps even imprisoned. But in a spiritual context, it's defined as the act of abandoning oneself entirely to a powerful emotion or influence. It means to give up, but in this context, it is to give up everything that no longer serves us. Spiritual surrender is to stop struggling against what is, to let go of the smallness of life and fully embrace its totality. It means letting go and trusting that the things you are setting out to do are going to work out for you. Accepting that whatever it may be can come into your life. Most of us want to control every little detail of our lives that are mostly out of our control. The reason we hold on so tight to this control is because we don't feel like success is going to happen. So we need to do something to make it happen. Spiritual surrender is not resignation or no longer choosing to care, nor is it an attempt to get beyond the suffering of life by going completely numb. Instead, it's been described as surrender with desire or in desire, because desire is still present and felt, but the will to secure is made subject to the act of abandoned trust. In the Vedic texts, spiritual surrender is referred to as the joy of surrender. It is the positive feeling you have when you simply let go. It's stepping out of all limitations, expanding beyond your usual conditioning, and opening to what Deepak Chopra refers to as infinite possibilities. While the normal concept of surrender is one of contraction, spiritual surrender is one of expansion. Because the more you surrender, the more your awareness expands. And this can only come when you live with an alertness that stems from love. It's offering up the small self or ego personal identity to that of the absolute. In Christianity, it's called letting go and letting God. In Buddhism, surrender is closely related to its principles of non-attachment and acceptance, referring to the ability to remain present and not resisting our happiness on, or not resting our happiness on external factors by attaching to things, people, even ideas that we ultimately can't control, which is the root of all suffering. When life presents us with something the ego finds painful and not pleasurable, our mind's tendency is to resist, avoid, or generally push against, rather than accepting that this is what's here. We engage in various strategies to try and change our feelings. Take, for example, the way most of us experience pain with loss through death of a loved one, or disappointment in relationships, or in our careers. Oftentimes, rather than acknowledging our pain, We deny it, putting on a brave front that we're okay, attempting to continue life as usual. Ironically, resisting a thought or feeling only makes it worse. We are better served by leaning in and simply letting go of the effort and energy invested in resisting reality. To see things as they are, meet what comes, and remain in conversation with the pain, loss, or disappointment. If we engage it, we're likely to accept and move through it much sooner, because there is no predicting these losses. They happen to us. However, non-attachment doesn't imply that we let go of our plans and pursuits or goals. Rather, we practice changing the energy or tone of our pursuits, focusing on the journey rather than the destination, because we do not determine when, where, what, or even how. Call them what you will, accidents, fate, or acts of God. The point is, we have no control over them, but it's our choice on the way we respond. What spiritual teacher Eckhart Tolle describes surrender as saying yes to life. And when we do this, he says, we'll see how life suddenly starts working for us rather than against us. Spiritual surrender means to stop forcing solutions on situations that we're unable to control, and instead trust and have faith that there is a divine force taking care of everything in a perfectly orchestrated manner. So in its simplest form, surrendering means coming to terms with or acknowledging something that we fear, because the it, whatever that may be, is in control, and we're not. In his publication, The Surrender Experiment, author Michael Singer reminds us that the universe has been around for over 13 billion years, and the processes that determine the flow of life around us did not begin when we were born, nor will it end when we die. He continues saying that what manifests in front of us at any given moment is actually something truly extraordinary, because it's the end result of all the forces that have been interacting together for billions of years. And we are not responsible for even the tiniest fraction of what is manifesting around us. I know most of you have heard the expression going with the flow. Mark Nepo, author of 7,000 Ways to Listen, describes surrender as being like a fish, finding the current and going with it. He tells us that we all have our own current. It's up to us to find our flow and work in alignment with the universe and everything around us. He continues saying that acceptance is when you find that flow and then run into driftwood or a stone or get caught on the bank in what Christians call the toils and snares of life. Accept them and the larger situation. He says it doesn't mean that we stop evolving, but before we can move on, it's important to acknowledge where we are before untangling to move on, because no experience is wasted. I call it trusting in the divine process. However, I know that for many people, the idea of faith and abandoned trust is difficult. Maybe some even struggle with the thoughts about the divine. But each of us is on the journey to finding peace and allowing the best of ourselves to become manifest. So I suggest considering the concept of faith as described by Indian philosopher Sri Aurobindo, when he tells us that wisdom, love, and grace are the soul's belief in the divine's existence. One of the sources of our faith, Unitarian Universalism, is personal experience. Personal experience renews the spirit and opens us up to the forces which creates and upholds life. I know that each one of you can recall a time when your expectations about career, romance, health, or perhaps a trip failed to unfold, and there was no way you could change the outcome. It was beyond your control. You decided that perhaps it just wasn't meant to be, and you let it go. Maybe reluctantly, but you accepted what was. Then, seemingly out of nowhere, you got a phone call or some form of communication with something that brought you the joy you would never have otherwise experienced if your former plan had unfolded. That's surrender, universal alignment, and going with the flow. I have many accounts of such experiences, but I will share one with you today. After seminary, I was convinced that because pastoral care is my strong suit and my first love in ministry, I would fulfill my call through chaplaincy. However, as much as I tried, I was unable to make it happen. No longer willing to sit idly by and not work at all, I gave up the longing for something else, surrendered to what was, and put my attention to that which was laid out right in front of me, congregational ministry. I've experienced such joy over the years in the various congregations with all of the people that I've met, through the rites of passages performed with weddings and baby blessings. Most of all, humbled by having the privilege of standing at the threshold with people during some of the most difficult and painful times, struggling through death and loss. As a congregational minister, I've had the privilege of experiencing the camaraderie and collegiality of Unitarian Universalist ministers and those in other denominations. Had I been restricted to chaplaincy in a hospital, I would have missed all of these opportunities. It wasn't until many years into ministry that suddenly, without any advance warning or effort on my part, the opportunity for chaplaincy appeared. Patience is required when we say yes to life, because we have to allow life to unfold naturally, with the understanding that everything you need will automatically come your way at the perfect moment. The operative word is need, not want, because it is the constant cravings that cause our suffering. Faith and patience complement each other, because between the two, they contain a complete code of conduct for a spiritual life and are necessary for harmony and well-being. We are so attached to the identities, dreams, and relationships that have brought us to a particular point in time because they are dear to us. But Nepo uses the example of the butterfly in a cocoon, as he explains that when the butterfly emerges, it doesn't mean the cocoon was false. It just means that it has served its purpose. Like the cocoon, our dreams and ambitions and relationships that fall away are leading us to the next best thing. From my heart to yours, may it be so.